Bonjour. Pardonnez-moi, je présente en anglais parce que pour moi, mon français, c'est très limité. Le futur, le passé, le subjonctif n'existent pas. Et, et les mots professionnels, non. Alors, merci aux translators. I'm going to present in English. So, all right, the first slide. Yes, Canada has a long history of traffic calming. I found these slides of the Canadian traffic craters. That's at least 20 years old. I hope you're still doing them. So I am trained as an architect, grew up in New Jersey, the most suburban state in the United States, and it's maybe not surprising that I have focused my research on retrofitting suburbia. So I am self-taught as an urban designer, and really part of what I really want to emphasize here is, absolutely echoing so much of the research that you've already heard, but also emphasizing that I think part of the solution is always through design. We have to design environments that provide great experiences so that people are motivated to make these changes and change their behavior and all of that. So I am going to, I do have to put a little plug in for the second book that my co-author and I have written on this subject. I maintain our database. I have over 2,500 case studies, mostly in the US, but also quite a few in Canada, of places where suburban, whether it's dying shopping malls, dying office parks, all of the parking lot dominated property types that have been either redeveloped into more walkable places, more walkable urban compact walkable places, or re-inhabited with more community-serving uses, or regreened because we never should have built there in the first place, and climate change is actually requiring us to do this. So the way that my co-author June Williamson and I talk about these different case studies is how they're addressing the urgent challenges today. And job one is disrupting car dependency. But while we do that, we can and are, in the best cases, also improving public health, supporting an aging population, leveraging social capital for equity, competing for jobs, and the big one, adding water and energy resilience in the face of climate change. And in every single project, we're rarely doing all of these, but I'm going to show a number of projects that are reducing car dependency and also helping with all of these others. So it's, I think, just really essential. So let me go next. So a lot of what I focus on is how the design of the built environment either increases our car dependency or reduces it. And the arguments over what constitutes a suburb and how the municipal designations, it's kind of like the monks fighting about how many angels can fit on a pin. I don't really care. I look at this more as a designer and focus on what is urban, what are the differences between suburban form and urban form? And there are plenty of cities that still have suburban form that I think should be retrofitted. And there are plenty of suburbs that have a historic main street, have a small town character that absolutely should be preserved and extended, that are already are walkable. So quick little, summaries of kind of suburban form in general are, boxes surrounded by flattish space that's mostly lawn or parking. The green space is just background. The buildings are standalone objects. And the parking is always, the parking is everywhere. The streets tend to be tree-like networks. Think of the highway as the trunk of the tree, the arterials are the branches, and the cul-de-sacs are all the little twigs. Urban form are quite simply boxes, front, sidewalks. Parking, if it's there, is either underneath or behind, in the middle of the block. Private buildings actually shape the public space. The public space feels like an outdoor room, and it's the public space which is actually where the experience is, not this emphasis on just the object of an individual building. And the street networks form small-ish walkable blocks, usually in some kind of an interconnected grid. They can be cranky grids, all sorts of other things. Now, a few just, stats, and Jerome and Dominic both gave us lots of research on this, but Canadians now drive nearly double what they drove in 1997. But the good news is it's only 70% as much as American drivers, or US drivers are doing. But the fact, it is our development pattern. We've been building a whole lot more suburban form. More and more of our population, the US, more than half the population live in the upper kind of an environment. I'm sure my stats are probably incorrect, but more or less, Canadian car owners are paying $36 a day, on average, to own, operate, insure, park, maintain a car. 20% of household spending. If everybody actually paid that in cash every day, talk about a motivation to actually find some alternative. And if Canadian households able to get by with one less car save approximately $13,000 a year Canadian, while reducing their carbon footprint, their pollution impacts on air, water, and soil. So, we're all here because we kind of want to change that pattern. The good news also is that there's a lot of retrofitting going on. And I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but a lot of it has to do with sort of the aging commercial properties that we built in the 60s and 70s. They are increasingly obsolete. And so a lot of that is just providing, those are the sites that are most likely to be redeveloped as more walkable, compact nodes in the suburbs. Demographics are dramatically changing. A lot of our requirements are still based on a 1950s model that assumes a stay-at-home mom, a commuting dad, and a bunch of kids, and a big full household. That's not on average. We're seeing more and more fewer children, more childless couples. At the same time, we're seeing multi-generational homes. So we're seeing more poverty in the suburbs. We're seeing loneliness rising. And in particular, it's the younger people and the much older, sort of younger adults, teenagers, and the elderly. And that also corresponds, at least in the US, with much higher rates of suicide. So there's all sorts of reasons: climate change, digital, new mobility modes, new market preferences. We're just seeing, we're out of sync with what our requirements require us to build and what communities feel like, well, we just want to build more of the same of what we are, and really what the data of our demographics, which really is what should be driving a lot more of this. And so just a few headlines, about, you guys know better than I do, of sort of what's happening here in Canada. So job one, reduce car dependence. So this graphic is from data from the earliest we had when we wrote our book, but from 2018, actually. 75% of land in US cities, I don't know the stat for Canada, is zoned exclusively for single-family detached dwellings. That's pretty shocking, again, given this mismatch where we really are. Yet, if retrofitted with simply sidewalks and bike lanes, nearly half of the trips they generate would not need to be made by car. Because we are, and actually the latest data does show, we're now over 50% of trips are 3 miles or less, which is a pretty reasonable bike ride. Not everybody can ride bikes, but it's for those who, a lot of the population can. 35% of trips are less than 2 miles. That's a great e-scooter ride. 21% are less than 1 mile, which is a 20-minute walk. So, and yet the typical suburban house today generates almost 10 trips per day. Canadian suburbs tend to be a little denser than American suburbs, and I don't know what the but it's not all that different. So, job one, just sidewalks. If we got more sidewalks and bike lanes, we could actually, imagine if half the trips could be changed. So some of the things I'm going to talk about, the strategies of what I really ultimately think we need to do are, one, use microtransit to seed future forms of transit. I'll talk a little bit about that. Consider all surface parking lots as possible future building sites or as possible sites to be regreened to conduct needed ecological repair. We have an excess of parking lots. We all know online shopping has really impacted the malls. Even on the week before Christmas, the mall shopping lots are not filling, parking lots are not filling anymore. So parking lots is an important area to focus on. Design buildings, landscapes, and transportation routes to reward human experience, not just to optimize the throughput of cars. That's pretty fundamental. But the reality is we've done a really lousy job of it. In general, the suburbs historically have, and still today, have always privileged the private realm. And that's why people fiercely protect them, because most everybody loves their house. They love their private, that they have a yard, that they have this private territory. But as a result, the public realm in most suburbs is kind of dominated by fast food joints and strip malls and and parking lots. And it's not, it's kind of a lousy public realm. And a lot of that having to do with this assumption that job one of the transportation engineer is the speed, is high-speed throughput. Get as many cars through as fast as you can. But we're people. We need those human experiences. So much of that is adding the trails, the sidewalks, the street networks to facilitate more mobility. So I promise I'm not going to show all of my case studies, but it might feel like it. Here we go. This is one of the earliest, this was the second example in the US of a dead shopping mall that was retrofitted, redeveloped into a compact, mixed-use, walkable community. This is about 6 miles outside of Denver, Colorado. It was a 100-acre super block with the big mall in the middle, a couple of outbuildings. Today, by 2015 already, it was 22 walkable blocks with public streets. 2 of those streets have retail at the ground, and office and apartments up above, and the rest are a diverse mix of different housing types at different price points, including some senior housing. That's the blue star. And then 2 public spaces. So you can see, again, the before and the after, surrounded by parking on Black Friday, the highest shopping day, back when it probably opened. And today, it maxes out at 5 stories. It's mostly 3 stories. It's actually quadrupled density on the site, but did not need to widen any of the roads around it because it has a mix of uses. It's capturing almost 40% of trips that would have been made from those 9.4 trips that each house is generating in the suburbs, nearly 40% are being captured on site as walking trips. And it's actually generating now 4 times the property tax revenue of the mall at its peak, the property and sales tax. So, and it's doing kind of clever things even, yes, it does have parking garages, so very much over on the right here, showing a view of the parking garage at the Cinemaplex, but on the ground floor, to make it more walkable to walk by the parking garage, they took 1 stall depth of parking and made those into artist studios, so that as you're walking by, you're looking into the artist studios, and you're getting artists into the community. So that was sort of an example on a dead mall. This is an example on a dead office park. This is outside of Austin, Texas, about 12 miles from the downtown. This was a 300-acre IBM site, research and development site. Anybody remember the Selectric typewriter? That was the high tech of the day. You really wanted a Selectric typewriter. They were designed and manufactured on this big site. Bit by bit, the first thing they did was put in one street of mixed use, pretty high-end shops, beautifully detailed granite curbs, really high-quality urbanism, kept some gorgeous trees, and made this sort of quirky street lined with retail and apartments up above. That was very successful. It's been added to. Now they've come in with a lot more housing, and they're getting a lot more. Now they're getting more office coming back. The jobs absolutely want to be here. The Amazon, Facebook, Google all have. They could have gone to downtown, and they have a presence in downtown. But this is kind of providing them the sweet spot of both having access to employees in the suburbs and coming into the downtown. The design strategy was one where, so the black streets here in the map on the right are the existing office park streets. They're wide. Those are kind of the B quality streets. They've landscaped them, but they're still. That's where all the parking decks are. That's where the parking lots are. And then they've inserted inside those blocks in red the A streets that still allow cars, but moving very slowly on very narrow streets. And that's where all the hip retail, the restaurants, the kind of and the residential. Now, so those become the real places. Those are now the amenities on those A streets. So they're cutting down the size of the blocks, dramatically increases the walkability overall. That's kind of been the strategy here. And again, really very successful. Sometimes it can be as simple as just starting with one intersection rather than a big property site. This example in Washington, D.C. starts with, let's see, do I have a pointer on here? Somehow I thought I did, but I guess I'm not. So over upper left, you can see the green areas in between these really wide turning radius roads. I mean, it was designed like a highway. There was a thought there was going to be a highway that never actually came. But that intersection was completely unwalkable because of all these cars zooming so fast as they're making their turns. That's publicly owned land. So the head of planning for Washington, D.C. said, I want to make that a 90-degree intersection that is easier for pedestrians to cross, recapture all that publicly owned land, and build affordable housing, which we desperately need. And that's exactly what has happened. So you see in the after, And you see the recapture of the first phase of the land, more is coming. And you see now apartments above a Walmart. You're getting both an urban format of a Walmart with affordable retail and the affordable housing up above. So that, and the redesign of, an intersection is one thing. The other strategy is to really, again, focus on the public realm, the publicly owned land, like the streets. So this is a well-publicized project. It's really amazing. I've gone out and visited, interviewed shop owners along this. This is Lancaster, California, a very conservative, Republican-led mayor for years. It's a small town, almost a 2-hour drive out of Los Angeles in Antelope Valley. Their main street was a 5-lane main street. They had been losing retailers to the mall in the next town, and then they're not getting any of that sales tax. And their strategy years ago had been, well, we need to make it easier to get to downtown. Let's widen downtown, which only made it easier for people to zip past the shops. And the speed, it was at about 45 miles an hour. They then that didn't work. So they then put their main street on a road diet. They went down from 5 lanes, including the turning lane, to 2. And they decreased the speed limit from 50 to 20. And there's a saying, at 20 miles an hour, 20 is plenty. If you're hit by a car at 20 miles per hour, chances are you survive, unless it's a really tall SUV or pickup truck and hits you in the chest and you're dead. If you're trying to make a walkable area, you really, anything more than 20 miles an hour, and you're probably still killing more people than you're helping. So also, at 20 miles an hour, the bikes don't need a separate lane. They can ride with the cars in the lane. And so you'd think it'd be a disaster. Oh, and they removed 9 traffic lights at the 9 intersections of this 9-block area. And this is an area that's obsessed with cars. In TripAdvisor, the #1 thing to do in Lancaster is to go out on this one highway where they tore up the little rumble strips in the highway, and if you drive over it at exactly 65 miles an hour, it plays the William Tell Overture. That's how much they love their cars. So you'd think it'd be a disaster. But actually, when cars are going 50 miles an hour, they need to be far apart from each other. When they're going 20 miles an hour, they can be almost bumper to bumper. You get more throughput at the slower speed. And you're actually getting then, people have a chance to suddenly go, oh, see, there's a sale, such and such. I want to stop and pop in. And what they also did, the change that really is the most delightful in terms of the experience, they took the parking and put it in the middle, in between street trees and street lights. It serves as a promenade space, it serves as a festival space, or it's parking during the time, but it becomes this really delightful space. It has increased property values. They've built more affordable housing. It's empowered the mayor in a Republican community to require every new house has to be solar ready. I mean, there's all sorts of things that have triggered from this example. I need to speed up. Another way at an even bigger scale is now Columbia Pike is an example of taking a commercial strip corridor 3.5 miles long, changing the zoning to become a form-based code rather than use-based code. This then, and what they did was they were increasing density by law allowing increase in density at nodes that they were hoping would eventually then be served by a tram coming along. Those would become the spots. And that the additional property tax revenue from that higher density would help fund bringing in a tram. We know that transit tends to increase property values, so this was a strategy to sort of try it in reverse. Let's densify first. So they allow 12-story buildings right along the corridor. That lower middle is a good example of a new 12-story. That same building, as it within one block, has to go down to 3 stories where it meets the adjacent residential. So they're not caring about the use so much, but they're caring about the form and how that, and so now the community is not fighting it because you've provided that predictability and that sort of at least massing coming together. So it's a terrific anticipatory strategy. And it's been working and it's continued on. Other places, Carmel, Indiana is a hotbed of retrofitting, again with a Republican mayor, and that's significant in the US because we're so polarized, and all of this assumes that it's somehow the Democrats only who care about these issues, and it's not. It can be presented in very bipartisan ways. The Republicans tend to present it more in terms of the financial. So this mayor has been mayor for 28 years. He came to, Carmel is this relatively affluent suburb of Indianapolis, and he said, where's downtown? Where do people gather? And nobody knew. He said, he loved Europe. He said, we're going to make a downtown. And he has, by building mostly on top of parking lots. So the before and after, in these cases, little fast food place has now become a 5-story apartment building, even though that site, if the developer had to try to figure out the parking, it wouldn't work. So the city is publicly funding the parking garage underneath, and then the value in property taxes is unbelievable. It goes from $34,000 to almost $1 million. He's able to pay off the bonds on that parking within a couple of years. So the process, the financial benefit, and then you're getting a full build-out block on a corner, dramatically increasing walkability, dramatically increasing a lot more housing. And he's done this throughout his whole city. What he's also done, his engineers came to him at one point and said, Mr. Mayor, our traffic lights are getting old. They're going to have to be replaced. It costs $250,000 per intersection. And he said, well, let's just get rid of them and put in roundabouts like Europe. They have done this to 150 intersections. The entire suburb is roundabouts now. And that means all their 5-lane, you don't need a turn lane with a roundabout. So all their 5-lane roads became 4s, and all their 3-lane roads became 2s. And they used that, so again, massive road diet throughout the whole system. They now have over 200 miles of bike lanes that are off-road, but within that public right-of-way. And that's pretty amazing, very transformational. And then just tons of health impacts. People are actually moving faster through the community while idling, because they're not idling, and they're also reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. Now, not everything should be torn down. In Montreal, there's this, how many people here know Mies van der Rohe? We have any architects in the room? Very important modernist architect, and he designed this gas station that has now been transformed into a teen and center social community, the intergenerational center. So there's a lot of times one wants to preserve, aspects, just including that. I'm going to move faster. Trails are, in the US now, trail-oriented development is the leading economic development force in a lot of suburbs, especially in Atlanta, where I live, where there's been a super successful one in the city. Now we're seeing it out in the suburbs. This is Peachtree Corners, about 45 minutes outside of the city of Atlanta, but it had a 500-acre office park that was aging. It was losing tenants because they couldn't compete with the young people wanted to live and work in the downtown. So they tore down a couple of office buildings, put in what they called millennial housing, which to me sounds like gerbil housing, but anyway. It's been successful, and they said millennials like to bike to work. So they've said, we can't put in a street network. We're too big, we're too hilly, it's too expensive, but we can put in trails. And that's been quite remarkable. And they deliberately located the trailheads at aging suburban properties that they wanted to see redeveloped. And that has been working. It's really interesting to watch. Really smart project. You know, making it more fun, making it more enjoyable, increasing the experience of walking and biking is so important. And biking on trails, not just for recreation, as commutes, is really important. Simple things. This is just a grocery store that got a new owner, and the new owner, a co-op, said, we hate that we have a blank wall facing the main street of town with a chain link fence. So they took down the fence, and then they opened up that blank wall with a beach. And it's just, you know, such a gift to the city, to walkers by, and it's right at the coffee shop and really pretty cool. Little things. Nashville, Tennessee has done an amazing job with micro retail. Tiny, 350, 400 square foot, little shops inserted in a row on a single residential family lot in residential neighborhoods. It's super hip, super cool, very popular, and it's allowing residents, it's not your everyday retail, but it's allowing residents to actually, you know, have more places to go just immediately in their residential neighborhoods, including a really cool pavilion. It's Nashville. There's lots of bands playing. You know, again, taking these drab environments. This is Crystal City. I think it's the most banal place I've ever visited. I mean, it's just the before images, even on a sunny day. It's just boring. It's bland. They're doing everything they can to now try to liven it up, and they're putting in liner retail, just skinny little restaurants and things, but to enliven the streetscape, make it more walkable. Super successful. And then I don't know who came up with the idea. They have a business improvement district, but they have monthly bicycle races in the parking garage, taking, again, the most banal part of a banal place, the parking garage, and making it fun, getting people engaged, and actually, you know, really reinventing how we think of these spaces. Parking is such an important thing. So liner buildings, I'll just focus on this one at the bottom. That was an entire parking lot, and then they took over the depth of one space to provide a two-story, it's open at the ground floor, so there's still parking at ground, but one story of apartments up above. It dramatically increases the walkability and the pleasure of walking by what remains a parking lot, but it's just a little skinny liner building. The liner, and rethinking again, we still, in the suburbs, we're going to have our Target stores and our big department stores, but this project took over a dead Cinemaplex, redeveloped a new mixed-use community, but they put the big stuff on the top and made little ground floor boutique retail at the bottom. And then you get 2 floors of parking, and then the Target is up at the very top. It's doing phenomenally well. They've got big escalators that get you up. So that was sort of one thing they did throughout the project. They have the office, the Cinemaplex are all up above fine-grained retail. You're getting the best of urbanism, and you're still getting the things that we expect to see in the suburbs. This was motivated by the CEO absolutely being shocked and started to, when she heard the U.S. Surgeon General declare the U.S. in a loneliness epidemic. She was brand new CEO of this company. She'd moved her way up from an intern. She was at the top of her game, and she suddenly started weeping. She's like, oh my God, that's me. And that's a lot of my women customers who are the primary people who shop at strip malls and do most of the acquisitions. So she said her goal with this project was to reduce loneliness. She can't measure it very well, but they put in a town green. It's only 1 acre. It's AstroTurf. It's not real grass, but it's activated by a big screen on the Cinemaplex such that They can program yoga classes in the morning, after school activities, every local sports team at night, and they're bringing people out. And that's also, those people are eating in the restaurants. It's helping her business. Really, I think some, and it's addressing public health, a real public health crisis. Supporting the elderly is another one. This is an example of a dead mall that has also has a town green, been redeveloped, now anchored by senior housing. So it's mostly senior housing, but it also has a town green, a hotel, it has shops. It's also doing some fabulous things in terms of green infrastructure. I won't get into that, but they're doing geothermal and heating all the sidewalks so the seniors won't fall in the cold climate in the winters. I'm going to, more just re-greening. Sometimes it doesn't have to be always about adding more buildings. It can be taking them away. This was a commercial strip. This was the Black Levitt town, essentially. This was an early New Jersey Levitt town that became predominantly African American. This was its commercial strip, and it had died, been vacant for a long time. So then they took out one of the buildings, made a town green, depaved and put in a lot more bioswales and more places to absorb the runoff, and just re-inhabited all of those buildings with a library, community college, workspace, creating a town center. Since then, more retail has come, but sometimes it's also just about taking away and reusing. This is a really dramatic example of that re-greening. So here was a dead mall that had been built on top of a creek. That is normal, sadly. They took out the mall. Finally, there had been terrible floods. The creek was just destroying the downtown because it was overflowing the pipes that are old and not working anymore. So they daylit the creek and then built a stormwater park. It's designed a little bit like a bathtub so that it's dry during most of the time. It's a park, but it can and did fill up with water when a major storm hits, and it removed over 200 downtown properties out of this small town, out of the floodplain, which then allowed them to qualify for grants to finally rebuild their aging, decrepit public housing, rebuild their train station, do a series of other great things. Stormwater parks are super cool. I love this project. If you do one thing, Maplewood, Minnesota, as part of their ordinary, whenever it's time to repave a street, might only be every 25 years, but when they do it, they narrow the street because they were built to suburban wide standards, so they're reducing the amount of space which will slows the cars. They add sidewalks and rain gardens. The rain gardens are absorbing almost 90%, 80% of the toxic runoff, and it's improving the water quality in Minnesota, which is the land of lakes and pretty worried about that stuff. But it's inspired now, so you're getting the public health benefits of the sidewalks, you're getting the environmental effects of less toxins draining into the sewers, they're getting absorbed in the rain gardens, and it's now just a routine part of maintenance. It's expensive, but it's part of, doing this incrementally helps. Sometimes you just have to anticipate, and the market isn't quite ready for all that densification. So you can anticipate the retrofitting to come. This is an example also outside of Denver, Colorado, where they were building a new transit station. So at the left side of the plan, you get some urbanism. It's on a former dead mall site. But at the right-hand side of that plan is a Walmart with a big old parking lot. But they asked the Walmart, they said, please treat your parking lot as a future building sites. So don't let the sewers go diagonally underneath it. Put the sewers in the drive lanes. And Walmart said, we'll go one more step. We'll put the trees in the drive lanes. So we all know Walmarts aren't forever. And when Walmart goes, those parking lots are absolutely designed and ready to be built on. Fact is, now that transit station, 20 years later, the transit station is now, the system has gotten so much bigger, there is more of a market, and so now they're anticipating a lot more redevelopment coming. It takes a long time, but at least they planted the seed. Parking garages can be designed to be retrofittable. There are already a couple of examples that have been built, but if you design it with flat floors and ramps that either in the center could be removed as a courtyard or on the side can be removed, you can, again, anticipate a healthier future, less car dependent. So microtransit, really quickly, I'm so glad that you guys have FlexiBus, and I've heard that it's really very popular. I am a huge fan of microtransit in lower density areas. It is a way of, I think, actually providing transit service where you have that lower density. Canada, you've got a bunch of projects now, a bunch of cities looking at microtransit. Niagara has been around longer than that one started in 2020, and so they've got a little bit of data. 30% of rides are shared, 400% increase in average daily ridership, over 1,000+ square kilometer service zone. Lots of sort of interesting details, I think, about how well that's working. I had my students, my students last spring, we partnered with VIA, the company that provides the software for for FlexiBus and others, and to look at a suburban area outside of Atlanta. I'm just going to show one team's project, but the students really, in this case, this was a site that was kind of divided into 4 quadrants by an intersection that was not at all friendly to cross, and so it just felt like 4 fragments. So they put a microtransit mobility hub right at that intersection, number 6 there, and tried to then also argue that once you put in the mobility hub where you'd get people able to take microtransit, transfer to the bus, where there was our 2 bus routes that hit here, actually only 1 bus route that hits, also have scooters. But then they also said, well, we want to see more biking and allow more, we have to densify around that hub to really make that work. So a lot of plans for new housing. And they found a trail, the red line. They found a little creek that the trail follows and then comes around. And then they put car-free housing right on the trail so that the people who are willing to not have a car and don't get a parking space, they get the view and the quiet and the beautiful air of living right along the trail, whereas the housing that is along the roads and has the retail, that is still, they have to provide the parking for. So here's a little detail of you can't really tell what's going on, but the mobility hub with this mix of uses. They put in daycare, senior care, coffee, soccer at the station, a little flex office, and they located it right at a dog park so that people who are waiting have something fun to look at, because frankly, watching dogs in a dog park is great fun. And then we were working with our local transit authority, MARTA, because they owned a lot of the property right there, this big rail yard. And MARTA said, we're having trouble. We have the labor shortage issues. Our own staff, 90% of them come to work by car. We'd love some workforce housing. So we proposed workforce housing above their rail yard. I'm seeing this more and more. I think there's a lot of places that are interested in workforce housing. So that's it. I was going to end with now the most ambitious transit project, really redevelopment project, I think, in the US is this called White Flint, where they're introducing a street network along initially 400 acres, but now along an entire 4-mile corridor, creating a linear city. And they're creating super walkable ground floors as well as really sustainable roofs. Really a great, great project. So it's plant those seeds for the transit, and it is pretty amazing what you can come up with. So just a reminder of that last slide. I'm done.
Thank you, Hélène. Yeah, yes, as you wish. Do you want to sit? It's been...
No,
okay, you're okay. You're so dynamic.
And I will put on the headphones so that I can listen in.
Je pense que Hélène nous a bien démontré que tout ce qu'on pouvait faire avec les espaces de stationnement, il y a plusieurs questions qui sont rentrées. On me les a traduites, donc je vais les poser en anglais. I will ask them in English. There's some questions. There's someone coming to the micro. I'll give you the... Je vais vous donner la parole après. So people are asking who led and triggered the retrofitting of these suburbia. Was it coming from political will or economic actors or developers? Can we rely on economical actors to lead that transformation?
Actually, I would say 90% of the time, it's coming from the developers and the market. But the public sector, the developers will go where the public sector has made it easy to do. So the first step is usually a rezoning and a community really saying, what is the kind of city we want to, what town, village, what is the urbanism we want, doing that ahead of the developers, and then the developers just go wherever it's easy.
All right. And I was wondering, like, did the pandemic, because I read your book before the pandemic, and did the pandemic change the dynamics? Because it's a lot of multi-story buildings and, like, sometimes small apartments. So did it change the mood?
The pandemic actually accelerated retrofitting enormously. I can't keep up with all, on my database, I'm way behind. I can't keep up with all of the new projects that are coming in, partially because there has been enough of an exodus of people leaving cities, moving to suburbs, a lot of offices moving out of cities, and yet it's both of those are not moving out because they didn't like urban lifestyles. They're moving out because they needed more space per employee and in their home. So it's actually, and what we saw during the pandemic was retail just being hit even harder as online shopping was even more increased. So there just has been so much more, frankly, dead mall. In the US, it's so many more dead malls and then more redevelopment proposals for those. They won't all get built, but I think a lot of them will.
All right. Oui, au micro.
I can ask my question in English, so it's going to be okay. So very interesting presentation. How do you work with businesses in retrofitting projects to make them adhere to the idea of a retrofit project? Because they, like Walmart, they depend a lot on parking lots. And how do you make them just giving up some parking lots and anticipating from developments?
So Walmart's a great example. Mm-hmm. Walmart has about 6 or 7 different formats for their stores. They have an urban format. That wasn't they've done the format that I showed. Mm-hmm. They've done that in a lot of more urban locations. They have smaller footprints. They have the big footprints. They can adjust really fairly easily. And like all the retailers, they recognize that their parking lots aren't filling to the degree they used to. And so increasingly, you'll see a lot of, I'd say 30, 40 years ago, it was the retailers telling the cities, oh no, I must have 300 dedicated spaces, and if you don't give them to me, I'm not coming. Now, those same retailers are saying, give me permission to actually put some residential on here. Give me permission to go more mixed use. I want a built-in audience, or customers for my store. And also even the idea of Walmart's had I would say, consideration of workforce housing, they in particular.
J'ai une question à l'écrit. Oui, c'était complet?
Oui, c'est parfait.
D'accord. Does retrofitted commercial or industrial centers remind destination places, like at the regional level or at the city level, or are nearby residents are sufficient to buy in the commerces? And how do you deal with, if it remains a destination, how do you deal with all people coming to those places without that many parking?
So it's a great question. And actually, so the project I showed called Mosaic, which the loneliness epidemic, and building on top of the former Cinemaplex with a mix of uses and the town green, they do license plate counts in their parking. They are gathering a ton of data, and they know that they're the only, that a lot of the people who are coming there are driving there. And it's in particular, suburban parents with kids in strollers. This is a place where they can kind of come together and play, which they don't have anything else within about 5 miles. So that's where they're coming. So yes, there are some that really do function as destinations, and they have a lot of parking, but it's always hidden. It's screened by the buildings. But there are plenty of other, again, retrofits come in all shapes and sizes. I showed mostly redevelopments because the redevelopments are more likely to really reduce car dependency. But there are a lot of them that are simply, reusing that existing dead big box, whatever it is, and putting in ethnic market jobs, jobs for local small entrepreneurs. Or are putting in healthcare or putting in educational uses, so that those kind of community serving roles are very important. And those are not going to be regional destinations. It's serving really a local immediate need. And what tends to happen, though, is we see more of the full-on redevelopments in very strong markets where there's just you need a lot more housing, and there's a market for that. In the slow growth or even negative growth areas is where one is more likely to see simply a reuse of that existing building.
And I remember you using the phrase, the power of food. You were talking about the restaurants, how it can animate public realm.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Never underestimate. I mean, a good restaurant can be anywhere, and it will become it can become a destination. But what's also been interesting to see is since the pandemic, grocery and food are the retail that has actually grown the most. We've seen more openings than closings in particular. So food is what people want to get out of the house. They're eager to eat.
On a une question micro ici, en français ou en anglais?
Well, first of all, thanks for coming over and thanks for your presentation. In some of your examples, one of the advantages or one of the benefits of retrofitting seem to be also the increased value of the land, which obviously benefits for like enterprises and taxes, for instance. But I was just wondering, what are the impacts on poorer populations that were already living there? Are they embracing those type of retrofitting? Because in a way, this is also some of the critique that we are receiving when we're trying to improve mobility, that this is something for the privileged.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you had like any input on that.
So absolutely, I think there's the fear of gentrification is absolutely real. What is different, I think, in what I see is that 90% of the retrofits are of defunct commercial property. So there's no direct displacement happening. That other 10% is if there's redevelopment of aging garden apartment complexes, and unfortunately there's a lot of that, and that is absolutely direct displacement of a lot of poor people. I think what the better communities are doing is at least putting in inclusionary zoning and requiring X% of the new units have to meet thresholds of affordability as a way to try to ensure a mix of incomes. There's always also, I think, a lot of this sort of transition from you'll have whatever is as high a density, housing types, but you'll get a declension and lower as you get closer to the existing neighborhoods. And in many cases, so you're trying to build in different price points and different size units, so it's both mixed income, it's certainly mixed price points. A little bit what is happening, as with kind of all new urbanist projects, is if it's the first one in an area and it's providing a great experience, the prices go up, and then it's not allowing only the people who are lucky enough to get into those designated affordable units are really going to get to benefit from it. But I honestly don't see a lot of displacement occurring because these are really principally in areas that have a dead mall. So it's seeing in those lower income neighborhoods is where we're seeing a lot more of these re-inhabitations, and it's providing more education, more, a lot of other really great things that are helping local low-income folks have more access to provide to jobs, to education. But those aren't usually benefiting as much from the more walkable, bikeable kinds of infrastructure, sadly.
J'ai une autre question ici au micro. Je vous invite à vous présenter.
Oui. Bonjour, Marilyn du collectif TRAC.
En français ou en anglais, Hélène a les écrits.
I can hear the translation.
OK, it's good. Bon, thank you. Comment est-ce que ça a été planifié, les projets, pour l'accessibilité universelle, ceux qui ont un handicap physique? Lorsqu'on réduit le nombre de voies et que là, on rajoute, mettons, quelques stationnements sur le côté de la rue pour voir les restaurants et les belles attraits, en fait, comment ces personnes-là, est-ce qu'ils perdent ou gagnent de la place à pouvoir eux aussi profiter de ça? Excusez, la question est mal faite, là, mais voilà.
That's okay. I think I got it. One thing I'll say is, so the FlexiBus, they also have wheelchair accessible vans. So that's, I think, the microtransit is one way. They're very conscious of making sure that they can accommodate the disabled. In general, I would say all of these projects are widening the sidewalks and definitely, always having sidewalks, and certainly generally quite wide sidewalks, so that I think it's helping. I don't really see parking and other things. I also, as an issue, I'm not sure again what the Canadian rules are, but in the U.S., if you have a relatively small building, always 25% of the residential units have to be handicapped accessible. So what we see in a lot of these projects, the ground floor units are all absolutely handicapped accessible. If it's only a 2 or 3 story building, often it doesn't have an elevator, and that helps you build more affordable housing. And so it's those upper ones that are stair, but that's a way that we're able to actually build and still make sure that we're including at least 25% being totally accessible. I hope, did that answer the question?
Yes, but c'est pour les gens qui ont un automobile personnel adapté à leur handicap. Il faut avoir une place de stationnement spécialement pour eux. Il y a le FlexiBus, oui.
And that's always required, yes. There's always requirements. So other than the car free that my students showed, every one of these projects has a certain amount of parking. They're trying to reduce the amount, but the requirements absolutely require for every, I don't know if it's 10 spaces or, for every number of spaces, there has to be at least one that is a handicapped space, that is wider and allows for the adaptive vehicles. That's always required.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, on s'en va tranquillement vers le dîner. We're going to eat soon because I think we're all hungry. But one last question. I was wondering, like, when we act on the territory, we always think we have the winter, we have people against removing parking, we don't have the money. So what would you say to encourage us in the action of retrofitting suburbia to end your presentation?
Oh, read my book. No, I think there's really focusing on the experience, improving the experience of the public realm. If you make the public realm a more attractive, safer environment for multiple modes, the private development will kind of follow and help pay for it. So.
Thank you a lot. Thanks, Hélène. Une bonne main d'applaudissements.